The title of today's message is called How to Deal. The question is not, what would Jesus do? But what would we do when we get into a situation? When Jesus went anywhere, he was surrounded by people who had heard stories. Who knows if they were true or not? But they heard stories about this man who healed people. People want to believe that. They want to believe the best in people. So when Jesus would go into a town, he would be surrounded by people. We know the story that's coming. At least I think you do. You've been reading your Bible. You've been hearing Pastor Steve preach. This is about the woman who had an issue of blood. So Jesus' reputation preceded him, no matter where he went. He would tell his disciples, well, let's go to Capernaum next. Let's go here. Let's go there. And the word would spread just like that. And the people would anticipate Jesus coming into town so that they could experience the miracles, they could see the miracles, they could feel the miracles, and they would have somebody healed or cured from whatever their problem was. But all these stories, were they true? Well, we know some of them are. They're written down in the Bible, inspired Word of God. But can you imagine what the other stories were? That he was 10 feet tall, maybe? Who knows? Who knows what the people were making up and telling from each other, one person to the next? These stories that nobody could do that. But Jesus did. We had a little exercise on how rumors get started, how things change from one truth to the end story. It gets told and retold and embellished, and something not even close to the truth. So if you turn to Mark 5, 24 to 29, we're going to read that story. It's about Jesus healing people. (24 to 29). Mark 5, 24 to 29. He had a leader in the local synagogue whose daughter was ill. And he sent word to Jesus to come. So Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. Stop. Now last week, during the communion service, I told you how the Jewish religious people felt about the blood. Now if you go to Leviticus 15, we'll go there now. Leviticus 15, 5 through 12. This is ceremonial unclean. If anybody has an issue of blood or any bodily fluids, if you touch the man's bed or woman's bed, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until the evening. If you sit where the man sat, where the discharge has sat, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. If you touch the man with the discharge, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water. You will remain unclean until evening. If the man spits on you, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. Any saddle blanket on which the man rides will be ceremoniously unclean. If you touch anything that was under the man, you will be unclean until evening. You must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. If the man touches you without first rinsing his hands, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. Any clay pot the man touches must be broken. and any wooden utensils he touches must be rinsed with water. Wow, that's a lot of stuff to do. If someone is ceremonially, if he's unclean. He or she. And there's a whole process that people have to go through if they are unclean. And if they're unclean, as we heard, or as I read, you must remain unclean yourself. If you touch them, if you touch anything they have touched, you're unclean. So if you're having an issue of blood, you're bleeding somewhere, you have a sore and is bleeding, you can't touch anything, or they become unclean. Can you imagine not being able to touch somebody, shake someone's hand, welcome you to our church, and having to go bathe and you're unclean until the evening? If you're unclean, you can't touch anything else. You can't touch anybody else. You can't hug someone. You can't give somebody a kiss, even if they're your husband or your wife. It's bad. Ceremonially unclean. Thank God we're not under that law anymore. If you touch anything that person has touched, you are then unclean. It's a process. So here was this woman who had an issue of blood for 12 years. Can you imagine? It never says if she was married, if she had kids. Probably not. She was by herself. She was alone. She had this problem that she couldn't touch anybody. She couldn't hug anybody. She couldn't have somebody come over to her house for supper because they would become unclean. She couldn't go out to the family picnic, to the town picnic, to the block party, whatever was going on. She couldn't do it. She was unclean. She couldn't touch anybody. For 12 years. Can you imagine the frustration that she had? How frustrated she must have been? And then she heard the story of this miraculous working man. He's coming to town. He's going to heal people. I want to be healed. 12 years. She couldn't hug anybody. She couldn't touch anybody. She couldn't do anything with anybody else for 12 years. How lonely was she? How frustrated was she? Think about it. 12 years. Not being able to go over to your neighbor's house and saying, hey, let's have a cup of coffee, a cup of tea. Not being able to work. Couldn't work for 12 years because you're unclean. Anything you touch became unclean. If somebody touched that, they became unclean. 12 years. This was a problem. She heard Jesus was coming to town. And she decided, I've got nothing to lose. I've spent all my inheritance, everything I had, every money that I had tucked away. I sold everything I had so that I could get a doctor to heal me. The doctors didn't heal me. 12 years. Can you imagine what it's like? I can't. 12 years. I mean, when I was a kid, I had chicken pox and I couldn't go out for 3 days, and I thought that was the end of the world. Bright sun, I couldn't go out and play. 12 years. Not being able to socialize with anyone. Being cast out. When you walk down the street, people go, oh, don't go near her. Don't go near her. She's unclean. Don't even talk to her because she might spit on you when she talks. Because she's going to be so glad to see you and so glad to talk to you. She might spit on you. She's so happy, but she's not. Can you imagine that frustration that she felt at night when she laid down in her bed, knowing that she was unclean? She couldn't come in contact with anyone. So Jesus comes into town. And the people are crowded around him. And she is so frustrated from 12 years not being able to touch anybody. She says, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. But to do that, she's got to go through a bunch of people who are crowded around him, trying to get to him, trying to be his favorite, trying to get healed. All these people around. So this woman crawls on her hands and knees through the crowd. And she reaches out and she touches Jesus' robe. And she knows that when she touches that robe, she's going to be healed because she believes it. She believes the story that when she touches his robe, he's going to be healed. Can you imagine how humiliated she would have been if that didn't happen? Let's read the story. Mark 5. (24-29). Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them. But she had gotten no better. In fact, she'd gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe, crawling on her hands and knees. Touched his robe, for she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Immediately, the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. After 12 years, she was doing everything she could to be healed. I often wonder if we do everything we can do to be healed, whatever our problem is. She knew how to deal with her problem. She had to touch Jesus' robe. She believed that if she touched his robe, she would be healed because she heard the stories, hoping that they weren't rumors. She believed that they were true, hoping that they weren't rumors. She believed that if she just touched his robe, she would be healed. And she was, immediately. Do we have that faith? I'd like to think we do. But Jesus isn't here. But what happens if he walks through the door some Sunday morning? Is his presence going to change us, Eddie? Let us hope not. Let us hope that if Jesus walks through those doors, we know it's not going to happen because when he comes back to earth, we're going to be going with him. But if it did, if he came through those doors, would it change our thinking about Jesus? Would it change how we deal with life? Would it change with how we deal with our neighbors, our friends, our co-workers? Would it change anything at all? If we could have that faith that that woman had, not caring about anything because she's lost everything, on her hands and knees, crawling to touch his robe so that she could be healed. Do we have that kind of faith? Can we deal with that kind of faith? I don't know. I don't know. It's something to think about. When we leave here, we should be dealing with the outside world. What we believe is the truth. What we believe is the truth, the way, and the life. Jesus. But if he comes in, if he came in right now, and I'm going to use a phrase that you've all heard, you've all sung, I can only imagine. I can only imagine what we would do if Jesus came through those doors. Or Barring that, which we know is not going to happen, barring that, if we heard a sound like the roaring wind, like a train going by, like the 120 saints experienced on the day of Pentecost, what would we do? Would we be going out and telling everybody like Peter did? Standing on the balcony and saying, "Hey, do you know what just happened to us?" Why don't we do that? Why don't we, when we accept Jesus as our Savior, why don't we stand out on the balcony, at work, at home, with your friends, or with your family? What a concept. And say, guess what? Guess what I experienced? I experienced healing. I experienced peace. I experienced inner peace that I've never had before because I have accepted Jesus into my heart. Jesus said to his disciples, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Well, they did follow him. And they did fish for men. And they brought in great harvest of men and women and children. Why aren't we doing the same? We have the same Jesus. We even have it written down so we can show people. But why aren't we telling them? Why aren't we filling up these seats? Why aren't we having 2 services every Sunday? Is it that we're not telling people about this? Or is it they're not believing this? Could be a combination of the two. Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men. And there was a show on TV that I don't think it's on anymore, but it was on. It was popular for a couple of years, called Deal or No Deal. That's what we should be saying. We're all going to live forever. Every single one of us. Every single one of us is going to go to heaven. At least for a few minutes. Do you want your friends, your neighbors, to be there with you? Are they not believing you when you tell them about Jesus? Maybe we need a revival. Maybe we need a tent for people to come and see what it's all about. Because certainly we're not bringing them in here. Not the way we'd like. Deal or no deal? What are we doing? Are we just playing? Or are we serious? Do we really believe what this tells us? I do. And I'm sure you do. At least, I'm hoping you do. It still leads book sales worldwide. It has, ever since it's been printed back in the 1400s when Gutenberg invented the printing press. And he did it for just this reason, so that he could print the Bible. It wasn't to have yellow journalism. It wasn't because of the news that we see or read in the newspaper. It's because of the Bible. That's why he invented the press. He wanted the Bible to be available for everybody. Printed 1 page at a time. I don't know how many pages there are in this Bible. About 800. Printed 1 page at a time, 1 book at a time. Can you imagine the love that man had? the persistence he had to print Bibles. Now, I'm not sure. I've never seen it. And the people I've talked to can't confirm it. And I'm not a big one to go on Google because I don't really believe everything they say. But I've heard that the oldest surviving Bible is in Russia. I don't know. A friend of mine, when I was in California, said he's seen it. I have to take him at his word. He says, I couldn't read it because it was in Russian. He says, but I've seen it. He says, and it looks old. But that's not the point. The point is we have it. We have, I don't know how many different translations we have of this book. It was 4 different languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, German, English. However many languages there are, it's been translated into those different languages. We have the book. We have the knowledge. Are you going to be fishers of men? Think of that poor woman, 12 years, crawling on her hands and knees because she believed. Do we have that belief? Do we have that faith? All through the Bible it tells about the people that were healed by Jesus because they had the faith. I'd like to think that we all do. We just haven't seen it. We haven't seen those miracle healings. Not here. We've had some. We've had some miracle healings right here at this church. But nobody outside the church knows about it. Is it because we just have the faith to believe that it's only going to happen here? We've had Bill Smithwick come here. He's an evangelist in Africa and over in Asia. And he writes us and tells us every day that there are miracles. People being healed. Crippled from birth. Blind from birth. Not being able to speak or can't hear from birth. Being healed. Because they believe. Do they have more faith than us? No. Because the Bible tells us we have the measure of faith. So I'm just going to paraphrase that sentence. Heal or no heal. We have the power through Jesus because he told his disciples, all these things you've seen me do, and you will do more. Are we seeing it? Not up close and personal. We hear about it, we read about it, and every now and then somebody tells you a story about someone being healed miraculously. We expect miracles, but we get healing mostly as a progression. Just like when you start out at a job, you start out at the low pay. And then as you get better and more experience, you get a little more pay. And as it goes on and on and on, you get more pay and more pay until you get to the top of the pay scale. That's how we think healings happen. But they do happen miraculously. So, the question is, heal or no heal? Do we believe it? That's my message for today. Think about it for the week. And think about what you would like to see happen. Who you would like to see come into a church. Not necessarily this one, but come into a church, a Bible-believing church. Be a fisher of men and women and children. Let's see what we can do over the next 4 months. Let's see if we can fill these seats and the seats of the churches, the Bible-believing churches in the area. It doesn't have to be this church. We're all going to go to the same place. And hopefully everyone that you know is going to stay when we get up there and meet Jesus. And he's going to say to us, welcome in, my good and faithful servant.